Jonathan Parker was the kind of guy everyone heard before they saw, quite literally. Long before his stocky frame appeared around the corner of Main Street, the unmistakable thunder of his voice would roll through the air like an approaching storm. It wasn't just that he was loud, it was the kind of loud that turned heads, even when he wasn't saying anything particularly important. Whether he was greeting a customer, barking orders at his teenage employees, or just yelling across the street to ask the mailman about last night's football game, his voice carried like a foghorn in an empty bay. And it wasn't just the volume. Jonathan was opinionated to the core, the type who saw silence as a wasted opportunity. He had an answer for everything, even the things he knew little about. His opinions weren't shared quietly or gently. They were delivered with the force of a hammer, as though he were trying to drive home a nail of truth into someone else's skull. Whether it was the local school board, the price of lumber, or how the government should handle foreign policy, Jonathan made sure everyone within earshot knew exactly where he stood, often whether they asked or not. Arguments seemed to follow him like a shadow, but strangely enough, he didn't go looking for them. He simply had no filter. If he disagreed with you, you'd know it. Immediately, publicly, and thoroughly. And if you agreed with him, well, you'd still probably get a half-hour lecture about why you were right, which somehow ended up feeling just as exhausting as being wrong. He wasn't a bad man. In fact, many people respected his work ethic, and some even admired his confidence. He had built his local hardware store from the ground up. Parker's Fix-It Depot, it was called. A place packed from floor to ceiling with everything from rusty nails to glossy kitchen faucets. He ran it like a captain commands a ship, with volume, pride, and a slightly aggressive efficiency. If a customer walked in unsure of what they needed, Jonathan would bark questions at them until they figured it out, and then lecture them on how to use it properly. For regulars, it became part of the charm. For newcomers, it was a lot to take in. Despite his flaws, people didn't hate him. They just kept their distance. Neighbors walking past his store would wave politely but pick up the pace. At barbecues or town meetings, folks would nod in acknowledgement but avoid sitting too close. Not out of fear or dislike, but simply because conversations with Jonathan had no off-ramp. Once you were in, you were in, for however long it took him to express every last thought bouncing around in his head. And what made it worse was this. Jonathan always had the last word. Always. Not out of arrogance exactly, but more from a compulsion, as if silence made him uncomfortable. He had to wrap up the discussion with his final thought, even if it meant repeating himself, interrupting others, or making a point that didn't need to be made. The problem wasn't that he meant to hurt people. Most of the time he didn't even realize he had. But his sharp tongue, fueled by an endless supply of opinions and an inability to let things go, often caused more damage than he knew. A casual remark about someone's parenting style would stick in their mind for days. A loud disagreement at a town meeting would echo far beyond the room. And more than once, a friendship quietly dissolved under the weight of too many unsolicited opinions. Jonathan Parker wasn't cruel. He wasn't hateful. But his voice, big, bold, and ever-present, had a way of leaving dents behind. His teenage daughter had stopped confiding in him, not all at once, but gradually, like a faucet slowly tightening until not a single drop of trust remained. There was a time when she would come home from school, toss her backpack onto the couch, and chatter about her day. The teachers she liked, the friends she laughed with, the small dramas that colored teenage life. But somewhere along the way, she started keeping those stories to herself. The laughter faded. The conversations became one-word replies. Now she barely looked up from her phone at dinner, and when she did speak, it was often guarded, cautious, filtered. Jonathan didn't notice the change at first. Or maybe he did and chalked it up to teenage mood swings. But deep down, he had become a stranger in his own daughter's world. She had learned that whatever she shared might be met with correction, criticism, or worse. A loud opinion disguised as fatherly advice. His wife, the woman who had once matched his energy with calm steadiness, had grown weary of the sound of his voice. She no longer tried to argue or even respond. Dinner conversations had turned into one-sided monologues. He would complain about the town council, the new cashier's incompetence, or how the price of screws had gone up again, while she stirred her food silently, offering only the occasional nod or polite, The woman who once used to look him in the eyes now looked through him, past him, or not at all. The warmth at the dinner table had cooled, not because of any explosive fights or betrayals, but because the constant noise had drained all the space where connection used to live. Her silence wasn't passive. It was protective, a soft wall she built to shield herself from the unrelenting force of his commentary. At the store, it was no different. His employees, mostly young, hard-working folks trying to earn a paycheck, moved through the aisles with a quiet sort of dread. They followed his orders without protest, but not out of respect. It was more like self-preservation. Heads down, voices soft, they did what they were told and avoided unnecessary conversation. They knew that even a simple question could invite a 10-minute lecture or a loud, public correction. There were no thank yous, no words of encouragement, just a running stream of demands and critiques. Over time, the workplace had lost its spark. The smiles faded. The laughter disappeared. What remained was a quiet tension, the kind that clings to a place long after the sound of footsteps or shouting fades. And yet, Jonathan saw none of this as a problem. In his mind, he was simply being honest, telling it like it is. He wore that phrase like a badge of honor, as if bluntness was a virtue, not a weapon. He prided himself on never sugarcoating, never pretending, never holding back. To him, truth was truth, even if it cut. What he didn't realize, or perhaps refused to see, was that honesty without compassion isn't courage, it's carelessness. He mistook volume for strength and candor for wisdom. He believed that being direct was enough, that people would understand his intentions, that those who mattered would see past the rough edges. But intentions don't always soften the impact of words. And in Jonathan's world, where truth came like a hammer and empathy rarely showed up to soften the blow, the people around him weren't thriving. They were enduring. Then one day, something changed. Jonathan had gone to visit his uncle, a retired librarian named Samuel, who lived by the woods and hadn't spoken much in years. Jonathan had always joked about him. Uncle Sam, the man of few words, more like no words. But this time, it was different. He walked into the cabin and found his uncle sitting on the porch, sipping tea. Jonathan, as usual, started talking right away. About gas prices, bad customers, how no one listens anymore. Uncle Sam didn't interrupt. He just listened. After 20 minutes of ranting, Jonathan finally paused and asked, "You're not going to say anything?" Sam smiled gently and said, "You've been talking so much. I didn't want to get in the way of your thoughts." That one sentence hit Jonathan harder than he expected. Not because it was sharp, but because it was quiet and honest. That evening, Sam handed him an old notebook and said, "Try this. Just for a week. Don't argue, don't interrupt, don't explain, just observe. And if you feel the need to say something, write it here instead." Jonathan laughed at first, but something in him was tired enough to try. The first 2 days were awful. He felt invisible. When someone at the store complained, he held back his usual sarcasm. When his daughter rolled her eyes, he didn't raise his voice. When his wife sighed at the bills, he didn't offer an unsolicited solution. He wrote everything in the notebook instead. But on day 3, something strange happened. He heard his employee say, "I know you didn't snap at me today. I noticed. Thank you." On day 4, his daughter sat beside him on the couch and said, "It's been quiet lately. I like it." By the end of the week, Silence wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. He realized how often he spoke just to fill space or control it. He noticed how much he missed by always trying to be right. That Sunday night, Jonathan went back to Uncle Sam and handed him the notebook. It was full. He looked at his uncle and simply said, "I never knew silence could speak louder than my words." Uncle Sam smiled again, poured them both tea, and replied, "It always has. You just never paused long enough to hear it." So friends, silence isn't weakness. It's strength under control. In silence, you don't lose your voice. You find what's worth saying.